If you would like to have your query letter critiqued, but you do not want to pay to have that happen, it can be done for free. It will simply be public out here on my socials. My name is Gina. I am an author, editor, publishing professional. I help you make your writing better. Housekeeping things, if you would like to submit, the link to do so is in my bio. If you do not want to wait for your turn to come up, I am trying specifically to find things that are different that we haven't necessarily talked about before. I do have a querying class linked down below that you can purchase. It's only $30. That will go through 3.5 hours of content on querying the process, writing the letter, some before and after examples, things like that. And this is a real live person, so we are going to be constructive, not destructive in our criticism, and we're going to be supportive of their choice that they have decided to pursue traditional publication. All right, let's dive in. June's Treasure is a genre blending middle grade science fiction fantasy standalone novel series potential, complete at 69,000 words. It'll appeal to fans of Reed and Reese by Matt Guzman, the familial platonic bonds of Zachary Ying, and it has crossover appeal for young adult audiences. Okay, so you don't need to include the bit about crossover appeal. That is a post-publication audiences make that determination. That's not a thing that authors get to do because it doesn't matter. You are going to be submitted to middle grade publishers through agents who represent middle grade. It does not matter that there's a young adult crossover, and especially middle grade to young adult, how is that going to differentiate? So it's going to be put into the kids section at the library. They're not going to put it in the teen section. They're not going to sell it as a teen book. They're not going to market it, right? It doesn't matter at this stage. You have to determine which side of the line you are on for these purposes, and that for submissions, that's just the way that it goes. Okay. Word count is great. Title sounds great. Genre is fine. Don't need the hyphen in there, but all of the rest of this sounds great. June's Treasure was never his to find, yet he convinces himself it is. That doesn't mean anything as far as a tagline. We don't know what the treasure is. We don't know why it wasn't his to find it. We don't know why he convinces himself. None of that means anything as a tagline. You'll see taglines like this on book 7 in a series with a well-known character, and oh yeah, that's exactly what June would do. So this doesn't do anything for us here. 12-year-old boy, once nameless and now known as June Wiled, denounces his past after falling from the sky and losing most of his memories. If he has lost all of his memories, how can he denounce them? So we've got maybe a disconnect here. He gets adopted by a loving family, guided by a persistent voice in his head that he calls his destiny. Is the loving family guided by that persistent voice? I assume we're missing some words here. So he gets adopted and is guided by a persistent voice that he calls his destiny. Chooses to believe he's meant to be a hero destined to find something important. Kind of saying the same thing twice there. On the unfamiliar planet where he faces discrimination for being different from the status quo. What is the status quo? Why is he different? He soon discovers that he has powers that connect him to magical crystals. He and his best friend, this feels a lot like world building and backstory stuff. He and his best friend figure out that these crystals unlock the path to a powerful reality altering artifact known as the treasure. Yeah, that's all. Lots of backstory, lots of world building, so we need to pare it down, focus it up. When the authoritarian intergalactic government attempts to contain and control him, believing him to be a spy sent to destroy them, he defies them by removing the tracking chip they implanted and changing schools. With his best friend's help, he becomes determined to find... Why is the best friend not named if they're going to be this important in the story? He becomes determined to find the treasure so they can change the world and free it from the government's iron grip. But the treasure hunt derails when June destroys a powerful energy source while saving a student that helped him in his mission, resulting in him and both his best friend. Okay, the best friend definitely needs a name. What you have done correctly here is avoided the name soup in a query. So science fiction and fantasy authors often put too many world building details and too much backstory details into their story, resulting in a lot of proper nouns that feel foreign to readers here on Earth, the only kind of readers that there are. But the point being that you've created this fantasy planet with fantasy cities and things that don't exist and places that don't exist. And you came up with all of these names and for all of these places and all of these people and all of these regimes and all of these governments and all these cities, all these things. And so you end up putting all of these proper nouns in there, and people have a hard time focusing on which proper nouns matter. You've done a good job of paring that down, but we don't need to pare it all the way down to just one. You can have more than one proper noun within the story. You've done a good job avoiding the name soup. That instinct is good and correct, but we can add a little bit more specificity here. While alone and vulnerable, June realizes his true destiny. After experiencing his fall all over again, he remembers he is merely a pawn in his father's plan to claim the treasure for himself, trained as a weapon to be used against those threatening his father. So he is a spy. The government was actually right. He is a spy sent to destroy them. To save the friend, he comes to call his brother friend definitely needs a name. June must confront the painful past and silence his father's guiding whispers. It proves to be a difficult task when he loses control of what he now knows are powers of destruction. So I feel like there's a disconnect here as to like why he has these powers, what this really means for him. So with the promise of the treasure gone, is the treasure gone? Is his hunt for it ended for some reason? Why is the promise gone? I'm not totally sure like why that's no longer part of the puzzle here. June must decide between fleeing to save himself and his best friend or risk putting everyone he promised to protect. When did he promise to protect them? So he's going to change the world up here and free the world from the government's test. This up here read like I'm a kid on a mission and nobody knows that I'm on this mission, but down here it sounds like he promised the whole world he was going to save them and returning to the family that embraced him as their own. These sound like young adult stakes, not middle grade stakes. I have an entire playlist linked in my bio about how to tell the difference between middle grade and young adult, and adult is not part of this question and in this conversation. But if the story is about like choosing an identity and choosing who you are going to be, that is much more often going to fit into the young adult world. The voice here doesn't feel particularly middle grade. It does not always necessarily need to at the query stage, so that's not a total deal breaker here. But with these stakes of like breaking apart from family ties and determining my own identity and determining who I'm going to be, and this feels much more like young adult, like what teenagers are dealing with. Now it might be a young character and it might be a young voice and it might be a very like, it doesn't feel small though, this is very like save the planet kind of stakes, so it could be lower YA and you don't need to necessarily make that distinction, but this does feel potentially like it is young adult. Let's answer those questions. Who is our main character? June. That's great. What is it that he wants? To fulfill a destiny that only he knows about. I'm not totally clear as to whether he has like a savior complex and grandiose ideas, or if this is like really truly the thing that he is supposed to be doing. That's not clear. What is standing in his way? Government power imbalances, like that is sort of like vaguely hinted at here, but that's not really clear that the government and the power imbalance is what's standing in the way of what he wants. Feels like it's sort of muddled. What is he willing to do to get it? Not super clear. Like we go out on a treasure hunt, but that gets thwarted early on, and then like we're kind of like fighting against an idea of an identity here. It's not super clear like what lengths he's willing to go to in order to secure the thing that he is important to him. And then what happens if he fails? So it sounded like we were trying to save the world, but now it sounds like his identity is what's at stake. And so we need to clarify which piece of this is actually really important to June. What are we rooting for? Are we rooting for him to save the world, or are we rooting for him to come to terms with his identity and who he is as a person? That's not super clear. Now, those both might be happening within the story, but there is one central arc that is going to be guiding the overall decision. And when it comes time for him to make the decision at the end, we are rooting for something specific to happen. And if they can both happen, that's great, but we have to have a reason that we are rooting for him. And that's not super clear here.